that is something that is becoming more and more important in the shift that's happening, which is that residents themselves, understand what tourism is and what it entails. It's not just an airline, it's not just a hotel, right? It's restaurants, it's attractions, it's this local experience, it's connecting, it's learning subcultures and, microbrews and all of this. And how important their voice is in that, in both directions, from a recommendation and advocacy and ambassadorship with visitors and with local elected officials, tourism boards, so that there is a flow of information and a sharing of ideas and a sort of a brainstorming and optimizing in a way that when those are siloed just can't happen.
It's another edition of Over a Pint, the podcast that focuses on the fast-paced world of marketing told through the eyes of industry veterans. This includes our guests. There's no theory here. This is real world practical experience. Joining me today, the wheelman, Mr. Kurtl, Vice President of Celtic Advertising. Celtic is a full-service award-winning agency located in Milwaukee's historic Third Ward. And of course, you're stuck with me, Pat McGovern, Director of New Business Development at Acedia, an award-winning digital agency also located here in Milwaukee. Special edition, we are welcoming back to the pod Ms. Jennifer Simmons. If you haven't checked her out, please go back and take a listen to episode 3. Definitely one of my favorites. She's back today giving us the new lay of the land in the travel space. For anyone involved in the travel space, the sector has been on a roller coaster. We've asked Jennifer to be on the show, give us her unique perspective on what's happening both short and long term. I'm super excited to get into this, but let me give you a little bit about Jennifer. Jennifer has been a market research and strategic brand planner focusing on the travel space for over 20 years. Her list of clients is just killer. She's worked with states of tourism offices, including Maine, Wyoming, West Virginia, Wisconsin, Nevada, Nebraska, and I'm sure I'm missing some of those in that list. She's helped numerous DMOs, numerous CVBs throughout the world, and was a pioneer in developing the values-based positioning approach for destinations and tourism entities. This platform has been really responsible for creating some of the most iconic advertising in the travel industry today. This woman is freaking amazing. Today, she is the president and founder of Market Texture, a consultancy providing strategic insights for brands. Jennifer, thanks so much. Welcome home. Welcome back to Over a Pint.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me back. It's been about a year.
It's been about a year. It's been a roller coaster, but
Unbelievable.
we got to do our thing because we got to stay true to the brand. Jennifer, what's in your pint?
Well, I see you're drinking aha there, so I'm glad to say because it's early in the day. It's 5:00 somewhere, but here it's not. So
Right.
My pint is an Arnold Palmer.
Arnold Palmer, excellent choice. Mr. Lingo, what do you got today?
It is always 5:00 somewhere. You are absolutely right, Jennifer. It is not 5:00 here, but it's 5:00 in my heart here. So I am going to go with a beer from Third Space Brewing here, right down the street from our agency too. It's Unite the Clans. It's a Scottish style ale. I've had this one before. It's a good one. Cheers.
Cheers. How is that? I haven't heard of that one before. That sounds yummy.
Do you like Scottish ales?
I think I do.
Let's have one together sometime, and you can tell. It's very good. It's a great brewery, obviously, and they do a nice job with this.
Guys, I was in a hurry, and so today I reached back in and grabbed another Surly sour. It's again the mango one. I got some of this downstairs, so that's what I'm enjoying today. Great brewery up in the Twin Cities. Enough about the beer talk. Let's get.
Oh, wait a minute. One more thing. Thank you, Kurt. That is my heritage. So my grandmother from Scotland is hailing your good health.
Well, there you go. How appropriate.
As if it's not Scottish, Jennifer. It's crap.
That is right.
What is going on in the travel space? It has been insane. Back in November of 2020, you were on the show. Remember that, everybody? That was when the world was a much simpler place. What the hell's going on? You got the mic.
Yeah, we have a lot to talk about. A lot has changed in that year, and nobody, including myself, actually has a very good crystal ball these days. The crystal ball fortune telling time window, like travel, has shortened. We can only see a small distance ahead, but so our high beams aren't as good as they used to be. But
for sure,
in the short term, we've just been seeing a spike and a decline in the most recent variant of COVID. That's probably going to keep happening. But we're all done, right? We're done with it. We're mentally done. We're emotionally done. We're done with the mandates. We're done. We're not, but we feel like we need to be. So that is going to be, to me, a short-term recurring theme. There's going to be variants. There's going to be spikes. Maybe some of the public health mandates will come back and then they'll get relaxed again. That's just going to be the nature of the beast because the virus itself isn't going to go away. In the most recent short term with the most recent spike, Vail Resorts, they had a lot of employees who were sick, and we also have a labor shortage, which is another trend we're going to talk about in a minute. So, some of their executives were actually out on the slopes getting people up on the lifts. But because of this, there were a lot of complaints. So that brand destination experience in the short term, because of the variant, has taken a little bit of a hit. And we all know that lots of airlines had a lot of flights, domestic flights, that were canceled because their employees were sick, their pilots were sick. And while they're all doing their best to stay healthy, that's the nature of the beast. And so it takes sort of short-term little hits on business. Sort of along with that, in the travel space and outside the travel space, brands are having to take a stand. You see this with a lot of articles on LinkedIn. Employers are having to take a stand. Are you going to require vaccination or aren't you? Are you going to require workers to come back to the office, or are you going to allow them to stay remote? These are sort of both philosophical and very practical decisions that have to be made. And brands have to make that decision too, travel space or not. And then they have to stand by the fact that not everybody's going to like it. Because if COVID taught us one thing, is that we all have a lot of different opinions about this subject and fairly passionate beliefs about it. And so brands have to make a stand. Most recently, Carhartt is taking a little backlash for standing by their employees needing to be vaccinated. That happens to be true to their brand, to their corporate values. And so they are sort of being authentic to themselves, and yet they still are going to have to stand up to public scrutiny. The flip side of that is something I think we've always known, but maybe COVID has heightened, and that is that brands themselves can shape the social conversation. They can shape social discourse. They can shape consumer beliefs and opinions as well. We saw that with Brené Brown and Neil Young and Spotify, right? Actually having to take a stand about where you come down on things either related to COVID or public policy or personal freedoms.
Jennifer,
that's going to keep going.
Let me pause you here just for a moment, because this is something that is, it's been around for a while, but since COVID, it seems like the accelerant has been hit. Like, people are really looking at brands more with this eye of, where do you come down on things? What's your opinion? Way more so than even like 3 years ago.
Right. Yeah, I think some of the, if you look at the big trend prognosticators that are out there in travel and in other spaces, they talk about cause branding and social activism, and sort of another word that comes out, another phrase that comes out is brands as citizens. I believe it was before COVID when REI took a stand on Black Friday, right? They were going to be closed for their employees, and that was aligned to who they were. And that was met at the time with quite a lot of positive press.
Right.
Patagonia's been very clear about where they stand on things like climate change and sort of who manufactures their gear. And so, yeah, more so than ever, I think there is both an opportunity and a sort of a necessary, purposeful decision that brands need to make about where do they stand and how vocal are they going to be, and are they willing to weather storms that will come with the fact that they are not necessarily going to be popular decisions for everyone. And frankly, as marketers, we know this, and it should come as no surprise. When we talk about positioning brands, right, we always talk about sacrificing. We always talk about leaving things out that aren't core to your business and focusing and not trying to be something for everyone. This is just sort of another layer and elevation for brands to take into their messaging and into account. Gotcha.
Jennifer, it's interesting. Because I'll forget to bring this up, but it's like, it's when it comes to brands and it comes to positioning, and I look at the travel industry over the last, year plus, like you said, you were on in November of 2020. There's the old saying, know how to read the room. You got to read the room. You got to know, what that room wants, what their appetite is. No doubt I've seen a shift. I've seen brands, especially in the travel industry, take on a different approach / tone, whatever, that they might have taken a year ago. It's shifting. Some are shifting more than others. Like you said, it depends if you're a Patagonia, it depends who you are. But as you look at the brands and you look at that, how they're positioning, and we can stay on the travel industry, let's just kind of stay there. I remember when we had you on, we were talking about trends and key takeaways. And one of the biggest trends obviously was health and safety at that time. It was big. It's like, that's the number one thing we want to talk about. As you're seeing this reposition, are you also seeing, in some cases, a reposition on some of those key takeaways that brand maybe wants to share with you? Maybe health and safety was here a year ago, but now it's still important. I'm not saying, but now it's like, it's kind of shifted a little bit. What are you seeing?
Yes, I think in the beginning, there was more fear and uncertainty, although there's plenty of uncertainty right now, but sort of in a different way. Brands had to spend a lot of time messaging reassurance points. And, I think I might have even said this a year ago when I was on, back before COVID, a hotel never had to tell you that their sheets were clean. Right? You made that assumption. By God, you hope they were clean, right? And then we needed this reassurance that we, wiped things down, and the airline industry had to educate us about what their filtration system was and what steps they were taking. And now, as we just said, we're done. We don't want to hear about that anymore. We are going to make the assumption that those protocols are still in place, that the brands are still being responsible because it's in their best interest and in ours. And now we want to hear about some other things. So we're going to make some assumptions. Those messages still need to be there, but lower in priority, perhaps buried in the copy somewhere else. You can find them if you want. You can go search and find them. They'll still be there, but they're not going to be the lead story anymore. So there's a shift, staying in the travel space. There's a whole bunch of Uber trends. So I started with the short-term little variant issues. There's a whole bunch of Uber trends, macro trends that are long-term. They affect the travel space and plenty of other market verticals. They're not going away anytime soon. In this country in particular, we've got a lot of supply chain challenges, logistical challenges. That is affecting travel. There's, inventory and mechanical things and devices that are stuck on a ship somewhere, right? That's compounded by the fact that we have a labor shortage. Even if they were coming in, there's no one to unload those ships, right? There aren't enough people to work at Vail Resorts. There aren't enough people that can staff hotels, right? So there's a shift in the pool of workers. That's compounded by the fact that we have that great resignation, or whatever label you want to put on it, right? People leaving jobs, changing jobs, because they're reprioritizing their life. That's probably one of the biggest lessons of COVID is what is really important? How do I want to spend my time and my money? It's brought mental health, wellness, and well-being from sort of a backroom conversation to front and center. It is now a key determinant about where you're going to spend your vacation dollars, where you're going to spend your employment time, right? These all very much affect all of the suppliers, whether it's an airline, a cruise ship, rental car. It's a huge impact. So there's a lot of sort of, I think the term now is upskilling that has to happen. You take a number of employees that you have in your pool and you have to train them, cross-train them, upskill them so that you can optimize the pool that you have, because you're no longer going to be able to reach deeper into a more voluminous pool of talent, because that talent is making different decisions than we did in the past, and we're probably not going back to the way we used to, right? And we've got climate change and sustainability. I mentioned that the last time. It's becoming more front and center to sort of carry on the point you asked about, Kurt. Southwest Airlines is taking a stand. They've said, if I have this correctly, by 2030, they are committing to having 10% of their jet fuel be sustainable jet fuel. Okay? So their historical brand was freedom, right? Freedom to move about the country, right? And love, right? Well, that is part of demonstrating that we will continue to be able to move about and do so in a way that's responsible. So where we want to move about to is still there, right? So they're taking some leadership roles in that. Etihad Airlines just recently went through a round of funding, seeking more investment, which they got. And according to their PR, it was one of the first rounds of financial funding for a travel outfitter, especially an airline, that was specifically oriented around sustainability practices. It wasn't to build another, to get more aircraft. It wasn't to build a new computer system or, reservation system. No, it's specifically how to get that airline to be a participant in climate change sustainability. So your point is, yeah, brands have to belly up to the bar and say what they stand for, but the level of conversation and the topics are now changing. They're shifting from cleanliness and safety to bigger world problems, right?
Jennifer,
Inflation, right?
Yeah.
We've got like a ton of really big pressure levers on this industry in particular. That's really making destinations and travel suppliers have to rethink in a much longer term manner their role and their impact and what their brand telegraphs from a leadership standpoint. No longer just, come here and have fun. That's still important, right? But where do I fit in the greater scheme of things?
Jennifer, I want to pause you just for a minute, and I'll let you get back to the trends. But you talked about the airlines, which is, when you first told me about that, it was like that blew me away. In Southwest and Etihad aren't going to be the only ones. Others are going to follow. What about the cruise line? Have you heard or read anything, gotten any feedback on that? Because that's an industry that kind of somehow gets a pass on a lot of stuff.
It does. Most of what I've heard recently on the cruise ship is in this conversation, they are probably among the slowest, with good reason, to shift from talking about safety and health and cleanliness to something else like sustainability. And that's just because of the nature of what they have. They have a lot of people in an enclosed space, right? And even before COVID, there were, rhinovirus outbreaks, right? So it is a bigger issue for them just because of the nature of the beast. I have seen some cruise articles where you can see them sort of thinking through how to become a better global citizen. But like airlines, I think they will be incredibly challenged because, as you said, the nature of their beast isn't, yes, they can offer carbon offsets and they probably need to do things like that. They probably already are, for all I know, working on greater fuel efficiency and cleaning the oceans and all of these things. They're probably already doing that. But the public scrutiny and sort of the expectation, the bar is going to get raised on them whether they are ready for it or not.
So let's switch a little bit into kind of, if we could, Jennifer, like people's sentiment now.
Yeah.
Right. And where is that shifting to, and where do you see the puck going in terms of how people are feeling about travel and what their thoughts are about it? We've talked about the brands. Let's go to the other side of the coin.
Yeah. So the other side of the coin is really about the lessons of COVID and how to take that forward in travel. And I alluded to this a minute ago. Probably that the number one biggest sentiment is uncertainty is the new certainty. Whether we like it or not, and most human beings, we're not really comfortable with uncertainty. We like to control things. We like things to be predictable. Even if we say we like surprises, these are not the kind of surprises we like. And in travel, we like adventure surprises, but we don't like delay surprises. We don't like cancellation surprises. We don't like new policy surprises that you get to the airport and you thought you didn't need a COVID test and it turns out to go where you're going, you do need. We don't like these things. So that's a sentiment that is now driving a lot of fintech purchases. So travel insurance, looking at clauses for trip cancellation or freezing prices or, flight disruption guarantees. They come in a number of different flavors. But those sorts of products and those sorts of features, even right now, just sort of going into the recovery, super popular because we're trying to manage that uncertainty. We're trying to bring down the risk, right? And feel a little bit more of the benefits of travel without as much worry. So peace of mind is important and mitigating what we perceive as things out of our control. So that's a sentiment thing on both the consumer side and on the supplier side, right? Able to take things out of a bundle and give people individual ways of checking the box so that it feels right for them. Your risk tolerance may be way, greater or lesser than mine. And so suppliers need to allow people to personalize the trip and all of those accoutrements so that they feel good about it. That's also leading to people making even shorter booking windows. We've talked about this for the last 5 years, that the booking window keeps getting shorter and shorter and shorter, as it is even more so now because of the uncertainty, especially when you're talking about international destinations. right? You can fly domestically, no problem. You don't have to have a COVID test, save Hawaii. That internationally, now you have to keep up with where the governments are on what's required and entry requirements, and even our country coming back. Is it a 72-hour window? Is it a 48-hour window? Is it a PCR test? Is it a home test? Like all of those things create a shorter booking window so that if the country I was thinking about going to, let's say Scotland, since we brought it up earlier, right? It's actually a good example because they have been considering that trade-off of opening up because they need more money, they want more tourists, and keeping it closed to not only protect their own citizens and their own health, right? It's this constant back and forth balance. So that means the booking window is going to be shorter because if I made that decision 6 months ago, their stand on their policy is probably quite different now. The booking window is a lot shorter.
Right.
Harder, right? It's harder than for a destination.
Yep.
How do I advertise? When do I do that? When can I get your interest compared to when it is you're going to book?
So give us your thoughts on that, Jennifer. I mean, you deal with a lot of people in marketing, which this is an issue that they're facing. How do you market? I remember last time you had a really interesting observation in that this was a potential opportunity, and this is going back to 2020, but this was a potential opportunity to start thinking about off-season marketing.
Yeah.
As a way maybe to drive some business. Now the game's switched a little bit. So yeah, how do you allocate funds? How do you promote? Well, you can't. I don't think you can go back to the same playbook.
No, that there isn't really a playbook anymore. That's part of the uncertainty, and so that is the antidote to uncertainty is flexibility. Flexibility on the part of the consumer and flexibility on the part of the supplier on the brand side. So flexibility on the brand side means more real-time budgeting. So states, for example, whether it's a general appropriations fund or a lodging tax or whatever the funding model is, they're going to procure their annual budget. But how they decide to spend it and when they actually pull the trigger on promotions, that is much shorter now as well. It's getting much closer to real time as much as you can in the ad world in terms of media buying. They're reading results much more in real time than they ever did, right? It used to be that you could look by quarter, and we still do. And then it was by month, and now we're looking, week over week, week over, year ago, week over 2 years ago, pre-COVID. Where are we standing? So there's much more analysis going on and reading of trends at individual destinations for them to decide when to promote.
This is super interesting, Kurt. This is really tying into just another big trend. What do we keep hearing? The need for speed, right? From marketers who are working with the DMOs, the CVBs, and just agencies working with, brands. It's what used to take 3 months, and that wasn't a long time back then, has got to be done in a couple weeks. And there's really not a lot of time anymore.
We need real-time decisions.
Yeah.
Hey, Jennifer, quick question, because I'll forget. It kind of ties in. I wanted to get your take. We were talking a lot about, sentiment, which makes me think about emotions and behavioral decisions and how that's changed since November 2020 when you were on. We talk a lot about, the how people travel, but we were talking, you mentioned Scotland International. I want to talk a little bit about the where. And I remember the big winners over the last year plus it was all simplicity, right? We talked about this and you had shared that with us. What were the big winners? Outdoor vacations, places that, calling back to the old days when you'd go into the car, you drive with mom and dad, you go to national parks, outdoor destinations, simple. Those are the big winners. The ones that weren't winning as much a year plus ago were the vacations that fall into that excessiveness, right? A Las Vegas or whatever have you. Fast forward, as you look now ahead, I'm seeing it now. I follow national parks. Now, I just got something on Twitter yesterday on a couple of national parks. No more are allowed in today, right? Because they're getting a lot of people come.
Oh.
What's the trend? What do you think? I mean, in terms of so we know what destinations and types of vacations were winning, what types of travels were winning over the last plus. What do you see? Who are going to be the winners in the playing field moving forward? Is it a little bit of the same? Is it a blend? Are some of the destinations or places that maybe lost and weren't the big winners, they come into the fold? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's going to be a bit of a blend. Some of that has to do with individual risk tolerance and, the COVID variants and all the things we've been talking about. The road trips are still up. Camping is still up. RVs are still up, and they don't look like that's going to slow down anytime soon. You had talked about simplicity, and the last time we talked, some of the winners were more, let's just say, less populated, less congested, either cities or states. And that is still true. The term now is sort of the ruralization of travel, and that seems to be a trend, that people are still choosing places that are less crowded, a little bit more off the beaten path. The blend, I think, comes with sort of the opposite side of the same coin, which is there's a ton of pent-up demand, right? People feel like they've lost the last 2 years of their life and we're done. Travel's good for my soul. I'm out of here. And so people are also thinking about now taking that big, epic trip, right? That bucket list trip. But unlike in the past where that bucket list trip may have meant excess or luxury or a tremendous amount of indulgence, which there's nothing wrong with that, it looks a little bit different now. I'm going to spend that money, but I may be going to a more far-flung place that I've just dreamed about, whether that's Tanzania or, Mongolia. Look, those are going to be expensive trips, don't get me wrong. But the style of the trip, right? It's a prioritization of something that matters to me. It's something I've dreamed of. I'm no longer going to put it off because, heck, who knows when the next pandemic or some other global something or other comes up that's going to wreak havoc in my life. I'm not going to wait any longer. I'm not going to put it off. But I still might choose somewhere that isn't as populated. Right? It's not to say that the New Yorks and the Orlandos and the Vegases of the world are going to take, a big digger. They're not. They will still have appeal. And in fact, Las Vegas did manage fairly well during the pandemic. They made their properties in particular made some pretty good choices. Back to the health and safety measures. And, so it's going to be a blend of all of the above and sort of flavors within them. Within all of those choices, there's a trend right now toward localization. So more like traveling like a local, getting in with the real authentic culture, not being a tourist, but being a traveler, right? This means that communities themselves are going to end up being much more involved. So toggling back and forth as we've been doing, right? There's that consumer sentiment. What does that mean for the destinations? Well, from a longer term planning standpoint, it means that smaller communities are going to have a seat at the table for longer term planning, whether or not the destination, the DMO, is ready for that. Because that's what it's coming down to, right? I want to have a real personal, here we are still in virtual world, right? We're connecting, and you said before we started that we've been able to rekindle a lot of lost relationships, networks, because we're using Zoom or Teams or whatever we're using. But underneath that is still this really strong desire for one-on-one connection, and that's where that localism in tourism is coming from.
You know, Jennifer, you had talked last time you were on, and it ties in a little bit with where this might be going. You talked about ambassadorship, and you're talking local communities and having a seat at the table. I love where you're going with this. A couple of weeks ago, we had Virginia Tourism on as a guest, visit Virginia's Blue Ridge specifically. We had the marketing director on. And it's funny, some of the, the mountains, this is the epitome of a destination where they were winning. It's outdoor vacation, it's mountains, but yet some of the challenges they're now seeing is some of the things you brought up earlier. It's like, well, we got to make sure that places are fully staffed. We got to make sure that the local businesses are all on the same page. And it was great just to hear him talk about, how a big part of what he does is working with the local businesses, building that ambassadorship type culture to make sure that, doors are open. They're doing everything they can do to make sure the customers have what they want. It was fascinating. And I was looking back at my notes from when you were on, we talked about ambassadorship and how it really, really is so important.
And that is something that some of these smaller, less popular DMOs can learn from the Vegases and the Orlandos of the world. Residents in Florida are quite clear that they are part of the tourism industry. They know the part they play. And they know the economic payoff of that as well, which is why they're sort of very clear that they're employed in the industry, even if they're just a resident. That is something that is becoming more and more important in the shift that's happening, which is that residents themselves, understand what tourism is and what it entails. It's not just an airline, it's not just a hotel, right? It's restaurants, it's attractions, it's this local experience, it's connecting, it's learning subcultures and, microbrews and all of this. And how important their voice is in that, in both directions, from a recommendation and advocacy and ambassadorship with visitors and with local elected officials, tourism boards, so that there is a flow of information and a sharing of ideas and a sort of a brainstorming and optimizing in a way that when those are siloed just can't happen. It's a really different challenge for a DMO now, in a good way. Part of that, and this makes the popular press quite a bit in the tourism space, is inclusivity, right? So travel and tourism is, and rightfully so, taken it a little bit on the chops because we've talked a good game, but really haven't done a great thing when it comes to diversity and inclusion. And so this is one of the topics where that tighter relationship between communities and DMOs can actually make that walking the talk, not just talking about how important diversity and inclusion are.
Jennifer, I have a question for you that's gonna take us down a little bit of a different path. Before I ask that, though, I want to check. Did you cover all the big topics, all the big trends, the Uber trends that you were talking about? I want to make sure we get that all out.
There's 2 or 3 more.
So,
in line with this flexibility being the antidote for uncertainty, the new certainty of uncertainty, is a need for diversification on the supplier side, business line diversification, product line diversification. Probably the best example I can give you is during the height of the pandemic, perhaps not surprisingly, Uber Eats generated more growth than Uber rideshare, right? So businesses thinking through other experiences, other products that they can offer their same customers because the world has changed. That thinking about optimization and diversification, unbundling and new innovative creation is going to be key. That's part of flexibility from a business standpoint, is flexibility in revenue stream, right? Sort of in line with that, combining the consumer side with the business side, is this trend of bleisure, right? Combining, it's not a new trend, combining business trips with some fun vacation, add on a few personal days, right? This is going to happen more so because, business travel, like leisure travel, was down during the pandemic. For some similar reasons, there's pent-up demand to go see people in person, right? But since we have this reprioritization happening, I'm not just going to fly in and fly out like I used to, head down, go from meeting to meeting, go home, get on the next plane, go to the next meeting. I'm going to take some time in there for myself, maybe meet some friends, maybe do some things with my family, because that prioritization of what's important to me still matters. So there's going to be a little bit more boundary setting on the part of the business flyer, and crossing, mixing and matching to optimize time, because time is still one of the biggest currencies, right? We all think we have a lot of time, and we don't. We're limited. And so that brings me to sort of the last trend, which is the cadence of travel is more deliberate. And I think that's going to last for at least another year. It's a little bit more introspective, a little bit more soulful, in the sense of not just taking a trip for the sake of taking a trip, but thinking about how that's going to be filling from a humanity standpoint, which tourism has always been. It's one of the things I love about the industry, right? You meet new people, you get to observe or get embedded in new cultures, new food, new experiences. That alone shifts your perspective and hopefully brings people together, so that we don't always just see differences in each other, but we see commonality, and it has a sort of a uniting and perspective gaining quality to it. That is always been embedded in travel and tourism. And now I think, at least for the next year, will be more important to consumers, and therefore businesses need to think about the meaning that they stand for. So it's not just checking a list. For a long time, travel was, check off how many places can I go to? I had a brag list. It's not quite there right now because of what COVID's done. And I personally see that as a positive.
I have to ask you about this. We talked a little bit about this before. You've got a lot of pent up demand. It's there. You've got a population that really wants to check off some things on a bucket list, like, hey, my time is going, right? I got to do things, and who knows how the pandemic could hit again. Could be anytime now, right?
Right. Or we've got global political issues right now that are probably going to come into play, right?
Right on. You've got a lot of pent up demand. You got a lot of people with a lot of cash that have saved up, right? This was an issue way before the pandemic hit, but there was in many destinations throughout the world, in this country, there was a real issue with just over tourism. Where do you see that going now?
I think that often gets wrapped up in sustainability as well, right? Sustainability of destination, sustainability of wildlife and wild places, and pollution and leave no trace, and all of those sorts of things. It's a little bit exacerbated by the labor shortage. Right? You don't have enough people to handle the tourists. And infrastructure. We'll go back to the supply chain problem. If you are a destination that is now experiencing a pretty good increase in growth and volume, do you have the infrastructure to handle them, whether that's public transport or lodging or attractions? it's difficult right now to build those things because there's a lag and a delay. I think some destinations, perhaps because they planned for this before COVID, perhaps because they're in the destination itself is not so absolutely tied to the economics of tourism, right? They have other revenue streams. They have other ways of sustaining their population and a number of other factors. I think those destinations are more likely to take some of the lead with the balance of this is how many we'll take and then we're done for a while, because they can play a longer game, right? Unfortunately, that's not the case for a lot of destinations.
Right.
A lot of destinations their economy is, darn near 100% tied to tourism. They don't really have other resources, and that affects the quality of life of their residents, public health, education. It has lots of long-reaching implications, and so, we live in a very capitalistic country. Not all countries are that way, but let's face it, money is needed for all kinds of different programs.
Right.
And so it is harder for those destinations to go, yeah, we're overcrowded and it's starting to degrade the experience for our residents and it's degrading the tourism experience and we've got a lot of pollution now, but it's hard to say no. Some countries have been doing it for quite some time. Costa Rica is a pretty good example about the amount of space, physical space, real estate that they have set aside. They've limited foreign investment to a level. The Galapagos is another great example. They have sort of a max. This is the number of people that we will take in the season, and that's it, because we need to protect the very reason that people are coming here. We need to protect it. Churchill, Manitoba has had a fabulous tourism experience because of the polar bears. That's going to be coming to an end relatively soon. It already has taken a hit because it doesn't have the ice it used to have, so the polar bears don't come in as much because there isn't ice there for them. So it's sort of a balance on where people are at economically and how much they understand the need to preserve the very reason people come versus, yeah, I get that theoretically, but for now I, need the money to come in the door.
Right.
Well, I think you're onto something. It is such a fine line that you have to walk, because I think you're right, Jennifer. It's so easy to say, nope, don't come. We're shut down. But at the end of the day, those dollars matter. And I go back to, like I said, with some of the national parks. You brought up Costa Rica, the national parks on a more local level. Now they're making it very well known. You can't come in. We hit our limit. Don't come. But I always wonder, what do some of those surrounding towns, those small towns that rely on national park visitors, I wonder what they think when the national park says don't come. And I even think about and you have a lot of experience with the different states. You look at Wyoming, and I look at that Wyoming tourism, but they have why responsibly, and that's such a big part. That's a big part now of their message, where it's like, hey, if you're going to come play in Wyoming, play responsibly, recreate responsibly, leave no trace, invasive species, whatnot. It's a big part of their strategy in terms of educating recreationists and visitors.
Yes. I think last time we might have even touched on this, Utah tourism, right? They had an ad campaign several years ago about the Mighty Five, the 5 national parks. And it worked so well, they had to turn it off because the parks couldn't handle it. And so then they had a strategy of moving people around to places that were a little bit more off the beaten path and the surrounding, and that worked as well. And then those smaller towns also, right? It's this. I want you to come. Oh, you overrun me. Now go away. COVID is a great case study for tourism, right? Several states in the beginning, not so much now, but in the beginning, they basically shut their borders and said, don't stay home, don't come, right? And now we have data about that. We have data. How many people came? How much money was lost? How much lower was the occupancy? How much less lodging tax did we bring in, right? We have poster children now for the downside of not having tours. A lot of it comes down to money, right? So, okay, now we know in some cases, states are actually using that to help educate their own lobbyists, their own legislators, the public officials, to say, look, we lost all this money. See how important tourism is. Now, let's make sure that when we promote to bring them back, because we want them back now, we do it in a responsible manner. But it's been an argument now because in the past, maybe funding wasn't allocated to tourism as much. And now we can use it as a lever to say, look what happens. Look how many people don't have a job. Look how many people were laid off for a short period of time because of COVID. So it's been really a great learning lesson all around. And I'm hoping, Kirk, that exactly what you're saying, people are reprioritizing their lives. And I'm hoping that in tune, destinations and suppliers and travel brands will take their role as citizen and their ability to drive responsibility more to heart. Because otherwise we're going to be here again in a year with something else.
Right. Jennifer, this is a really good segue. So as marketers, as DMOs and the marketing departments within the different states and CVBs throughout the world, what do you do? How do you start marketing? In the intro, one of the things that you really pioneered and developed very well was the value-based marketing approach. Is that still relevant? Or is something else has replaced that? Where are things going? Give marketers who are looking to say, how do I pivot on my message? What do I do? How do I think about this? Give us your insights.
Yeah, I personally think it's even more essential for travel brands to have a clear brand value and understand the core personal values of their audience and speak directly to them. Because that's what this great resignation, life reprioritization is all about. It is all about going back to your own values and using that as a tool to make your decisions. Right? I digress for a second. Just yesterday, the day before, I read an article in Harvard Business Review. It was about the Great Resignation. And the article was basically saying that, as business comes back on, some organizations are pushing their employees quite hard. Do whatever it takes, get new business, bring in more money, do whatever it takes. Well, do whatever it takes for some people is going to cross some ethical, moral boundaries. And they're not going to be as willing to do that anymore, right? It used to be that I would put my head down and do what my employer said, and I needed the job and I needed the money. And well, if I go into my values and I feel like my employer is not treating other coworkers well, or they're not making good leadership decisions, or I don't agree with the vax mandate or whatever it is, people are now taking that more into account and choosing whether or not they work there. Those are all values decisions. The same values decisions are why people are choosing, I'm going to take my bucket trip list because I lost 2 years of my life, or I'm still going to go somewhere rural because of putting my own health and safety first, or whatever your reasons are. Those are all values-based decisions. The scrutiny on brands and the role they play, whether or not you agree with their policies, those are all come down to values, whether we're conscious about it or not. So to me, I see it as even more important than always, as sort of a core tenet. But the context in which that comes wrapped, which is what we we're talking about earlier, is really important. Shifting the conversation to what's really relevant right now for consumers. You still need to be true to who you are. You still probably shouldn't be trying to be everything to everybody, right? Stand for what your essence is, but see yourself in a bigger global role. And that's a hard line to walk, right?
There's just a natural tendency in this space that you want to be all things to all people. Are you a family destination? You bet. You want a golf outing? We're the perfect place.
Yep.
How about adult entertainment? Yep, we got it.
Yep.
How about outdoors, hiking? Are you kidding me?
We have something for everyone.
We've got something for everyone.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing from you is brands, especially now in the travel space, have to be very, very particular on what they're going to focus on. Nebraska is a great example.
It is.
And they're really, really going to just have to say, this is what we are. We're going to have to let some things go. If we picked up that business, awesome, but we can't be everything to everybody. Just given the way the situation is working, budgets are going to be stretched.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Budgets are stretched, and for some destinations, because the budget was based on lodging tax or restaurant tax or something, and those revenues were down, their budget they're working with right now is a little bit smaller, unless there were special COVID procurements, which there have been.
Yeah.
So smaller budgets, faster real-time decision-making, shorter booking window, so I can't see long into the funnel of who's coming or who's not, right? All of these things suggest tighter focus, not wider shotgun. They all say that you should be more disciplined. That's what flexibility, it seems, I know, it seems paradoxical, but the very thing that will give a destination flexibility is disciplined thinking underneath it.
If I could jump in, Pat, real quickly.
Yeah,
I love your question initially. It was a great question. And Jennifer, I love where you were going with, the whole, what do marketers do? We heard this when we chatted with you a year plus ago, and we've heard it from our guests too. We've had, you're very familiar. You worked with the great folks in Nebraska. We had, they're a great example. When we had Virginia's Blue Ridge on a couple weeks ago, they knew exactly who they were. They knew exactly the type of person they wanted to bring in and the type of vacation they're going to offer. Authenticity, truthfulness. I think it's one of those, the more things change, the more they stay the same. That's usually that's the kind of the lesson you want brands to follow. It's like you had said it. It's like, you can't be everything to everyone. We might have to let some business go. Be true to who you are, understand that, and go with it. And I think now more than ever, it's hard to do, but you got to stick to that. And again, Nebraska, great example. What wonderful.
Example.
I mean, you were a part of that. You know exactly. They were awesome guests. I mean, that campaign is about authenticity and knowing who you are. Pat, when we had David Aldridge on from Visit Virginia's Blue Ridge, I mean, he knew exactly what that destination was all about and who they were going after and what they're offering. That, to me, they get it. And there's probably a lot more that don't get it than do. But boy, that authenticity and truthfulness, boy, is that a common factor in that equation too, now more than ever.
Especially those are great examples, and they're states. that, or regions that tend to have more money. When you're talking about like cities, smaller cities, say Vegas and Orlando, right? Their budgets aren't as big, And so that focus, that sacrifice, that identification of the bullseye of your essence and aligning people who are shared a value and share that desire and need that in their life, that's good stewardship of your funds. It's very difficult. So I'm working with a number of different destinations. One is coming to mind right now that, has a reasonable budget, but not super huge. They're outgunned by other similar sorts of their ski areas or resorts. That tendency, Pat, that you talked about, but we could get this and we could get this and we could get these people and we have something for them. Yes, you have something for them, but you do not have the money to ask all of them. And you are also in a even more heightened competitive set, right? Because people stopped advertising or pulled back or shifted, waiting for whatever was going to happen with COVID. Guess what's going to happen now? The megaphones are going to be out. The advertising is going to be stronger, right? Because now we all want our fair share of the pie, right? So there's going to be a lot more competitive voice confusion and overlap in the media channels. And a lot of these destinations that we're talking about like to target the same geographic markets, especially the bigger ones, the New Yorks, the LAs, the Dallas, the Chicagos, the Minneapolis, right? As you all know, those are expensive media markets. So now you're going to be fighting it out with even more people, right? You have a smaller budget because of what's happened in the past. Media prices have not gone down. Sticking to what you're good at, being clear about what you stand for is basically the golden ticket to get through that mess. And by the way, like you were saying, your other guest did, know who that target audience is and go tighter, not bigger. Get more of those consumers who are aligned to your brand, who care about what you stand for. They will advocate for you.
Jennifer, who's in your estimation over since the first time you were on the show to now and even looking a little bit ahead? Give us your list. Who are the winners? Who are the winners in the travel space, and who do you think, boy, you guys missed an opportunity here to do something pretty unique and special?
Well, I think the airlines are going to be winners. Perhaps not any of their own doing, right? There's pent up demand, and especially on they have already been seeing it come back on the domestic side, and certainly international is following because of the bucket list trips we've been talking about. To my knowledge, though, they are still not doing as well on the business side, and that is that was always their bread and butter because
right.
the rate structure. That I think is going to be coming back, but slower to come back.
Yep.
So they're going to win whether or not they do anything to help themselves, which I think a lot of them actually are doing a pretty good job. The same destinations, as Kirk had said before, that were winning before, the more rural, less populated, they're still going to for another year at least. They're still going to be the folks they're going to tiptoe into this. They have pent up demand, but they're going to tiptoe. Mm-hmm. And they're going to be more careful, and they're going to stay a little bit closer to home. They still are planning that big, epic trip, but they're going to see how they feel taking a few pilot runs first. And then some of those more epic destinations, they're going to win as well because of the other side of the coin. So, the destinations that African safari that you've always dreamed of doing, but you haven't ever pulled the trigger on, those sorts of places and experiences longer haul travel, longer experience when you're there because of how far you've gone. We're willing to spend money on, maybe it's a hot air balloon over the Serengeti, whatever it is, they're going to win. They're going to win in the short term. I still see Airbnb and the ride shares doing a little bit better than some of the more traditional big branded hotels or rental cars in at least the next year. Part of the localism.
We covered a ton of ground, Jennifer. What did we miss? I'm sure you've got more notes there. What else, what else do you want to share with us?
Oh, we have covered a lot of ground. I think this is a fascinating time. I think it's a very challenging time for DMOs and brand marketers. But I am sort of an optimist, and I like to think that the challenges breed opportunities for people to think differently, not necessarily think bigger, but to think differently and more creatively and more insightfully and perhaps a little bit more soulfully. Those will be the ones that come out in a better place. And they might not be able to even see what that place is right now, but if they put in the work, I think they will make it through this transition year. And maybe we'll get back, as a lot of the pundits are saying, we might get back in 2 years to where we were pre-COVID on the travel side. I think there's also the effect of what COVID has done from a human standpoint. There's a winnowing. There's going to be people that get lost, people, brands, experiences, destinations that get lost by the wayside. And that is sad, but it is also sort of a life cycle of how the tourism business goes, right? We've had this before. We've had SARS, we've had bird flu, we've had, bombings. We've had a number of things, catastrophes that have happened. And usually what that nets out is new experiences and diverse ways of thinking and different ways of promoting on the plus side, and things that disappear. And the same thing will happen here. So I hope that what we've talked about today will give some people some food for thought about how to not just survive, but really come out thriving in a way that they perhaps before, because they didn't need to, couldn't imagine. And that's all good for our space. I think that's good for us as consumers as well.
This has been awesome. Kurt, what else you got?
I think Jennifer exceeded our expectations. I knew it was going to be good, but I was, first of all, thank you, Jennifer, for coming back on. Let's start there. I'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you. It's always interesting to bring back a great guest. You were fantastic. You were one of our first ones, and I think you are spot on. This is a fascinating industry. It's a fascinating time for travel, and that's why I was excited to have you back on, because when we had you on, it was so early on, November 2020. Think about where we were. Think about where we are now. So what a great conversation. I appreciate you coming on and sharing some insight in your time with us.
Well, thanks for having me back, guys.
Jennifer, you've got the last word. How do people reach out? How do people find you? How do they connect with you? Get some more of your insights, work with you, collaborate, whatever.
You can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest place that has all my contact information on it. And I know you're going to put this podcast out there, and in the comments we can put our emails and whatever into it. So, and if they can't find me that way, they can find you guys, and you can send them.
We'll send them to you.
Jennifer, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Loved it. You're awesome. Kurt.
Thank you.
Happy travels.
Happy travels. Cheers.